There you go. Good morning, sir. How you doing?
Yeah, good, good, good.
I was expecting you in your stripy stuff, your stripy suit.
No, I
I did.
don't wear that much these days. I haven't worn a tie for quite a time. And I think, I always like wearing, I had this adage that I learned actually from Piers Morgan on the Mirror, and he used to keep saying to people, um, look smart, work smart.
Yep.
I remember many years ago, I used to send people home, reporters sometime, if they didn't wear a tie, because I felt if you were going to be on someone's doorstep giving bad news at midnight, your family's died in this car crash, you need to look presentable.
Yep.
As time went on, though, in this world, I mean, you're not wearing a tie. Um, Things change, and sometimes these days you go to meetings and you feel overdressed.
Yep. Well, I'm not even wearing trousers.
Well,
I'm enjoying it. You never know, though. You never know. Thanks ever so much for joining us anyway, Ian, today in this interview. I've always wanted to sit down and interview, actually, Ian. You've had a very interesting background, obviously, in journalism, and I'd like to really chat about that and go through your background and how you got to Gloucester and
yeah,
your career in the papers and all the rest of it. So where are you actually from, sir? Where were you born?
I was born in South London, West Norwood, South London, near Dulwich. It's the sort of worst end of that area.
Is that why you're a gooner, is it?
Yeah, but that's South London.
Right.
And, Arsenal and North London, first match I ever went to was at Crystal Palace, which is quite near us. But I've always, been an Arsenal fan.
Yep, yep. So tell us about that sort of early childhood then, whereabouts did you grow up and what got you into journalism?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I love football. I was not very good at it. And I went to a huge boys' comprehensive school, Tulse Hill. And at the time, Mark, that was one of the largest schools in the country. It had nearly 2,000 boys and amazing footballers. I mean, in the main top tier teams, you had people who were professional footballers. I wouldn't have a hope of getting into those. So I often used to play for the sort of fifth year, the third or fourth team. But I always wanted to be a reporter. So what I did, I went to the first team games often, did reports, and I sent them to all the local papers and they used them.
Right.
So that sort of got me started, really. And I was pretty much a failure at school. I was in in a grammar stream because I failed the 11 plus.
Yep.
And most of my classmates went to university. I wanted to be a journalist, so I actually left. I had pretty dismal O-levels. I only got sort of 5 O-levels, and I was expected to get about 9 or 10.
Right.
So I left, and
why did you do so badly? Sorry. Or
I worried a lot. I used to sit on the loo all night revising.
Right.
And I got quite a good memory, almost a photographic memory. I used to sort of revise Latin all night in the loo, and it was just crazy. And it affected me quite a lot. But I said to my mum, look, I want to be a reporter. Went to the school, sort of interview evening. They said, oh, no, he'll never get into that. There's too much competition. So I wrote to 140 newspapers throughout the country.
Wow.
I got replies to most of them. And one of them was from Kelvin Mackenzie's dad, Kelvin of the Sun, great guy, became a friend of mine. And Ian Mackenzie said, look, I can't offer you a job at the moment, but I will in 6 months. So I went to work as a postboy in Sir Robert McAlpine's, who were major contractors, bridge builders, nuclear power stations in Park Lane. So I was quite happy to do that. And I always always liked to be smart. And, you know, I used to go in Sir Robert McAlpine's Rolls Royce often down to Ascot to live a special mail for him. I remember one day he said to me, well, what are you doing here? You look very smart. And I said, oh, I want to be a reporter. He said, well, why don't you come and work for us? And I said, no, I want to go into newspapers. So I then started under Ian Mackenzie, and I went to night school. I took my A-level in English and history, and also did shorthand. And that was quite a laugh, because I was the only bloke in this class of girls who thought this was amazing. Why would you want to do shorthand?
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting, Mark. The Press Association reporters in the Commons, most of them are men. So I actually ended up getting a certificate for about 140 words a minute at one time.
Wow,
and
okay.
I still do loads of shorthand. That's why my writing is so awful.
Right.
And from the South London Observer, I stayed there. I was an apprentice, signed proper indenture forms, and I was there for 3 years. And then I went on the first ever training course for journalists in this country at Harlow Technical College. Met a girl and got involved with her, and I decided to join her in Sheffield. So I went to the Sheffield Telegraph, which was then a big morning paper in Sheffield, and as crime reporter. And I was about 21 there. And I won an award, a Young Journalist of the Year award for police investigation. And the Daily Mail in Manchester rang me and said, well, would you like to come and join us? So I did. And when I was 22, I went to the Daily Mail in Manchester as a reporter. And from then I was in Ireland quite a lot in the very, very bad days in Belfast, where you'd wake up in the Europa Hotel. Frankly, we were all pretty drunk most of the time. And you'd find that the glass in your room had suddenly caved in. You were probably in a comatose because you were working crazy hours. And Londonderry, I worked in a lot. That was quite dangerous there with Bernadette Devlin and petrol bombs and things. And so I sort of stayed with the Mail, and then I went to the Express. What happened then? I sort of had a bit of a row with the Mail, and I sort of joined a guy as partner in a news agency in Manchester.
All right, okay.
And did that for a couple of years, and then
as a news agent, when you worked there, was it in partnership with them, or as a business, so private business?
Yeah.
And how did you find that?
Brilliant, because it's all about news. You're working for national newspapers all the time, mainly for the Mirror, Express, whatever. And remember, at that time, these were big operations. I mean, Manchester, Daily Express in Manchester had about 45 reporters alone in Manchester. So these were big operations, and they printed there. They printed in Manchester for the whole of the North, Scotland, and the whole of Ireland. Anyway, I got to know a guy called Charlie Wilson, who became editor of the Times. He was deputy editor of the Daily Mail in Manchester, and he said, "Why don't you come and work for us again?" So I went there as deputy news editor, and I then became news editor of the Daily Mail. I suppose that was one of the great jobs. Then I worked in London a lot on the news.
How old were you then, Ian? Sorry.
Oh God, I'd say about 30, 32,
right,
that sort of area. Then I had a bit of a row with the Mail over a story. Anyway, the long and the short of it,
Can you tell
And
us the
these
story?
things,
Sorry, can you tell us the story? What was the story?
yeah, it involved a politician, and I got on the wrong end of the stick. I took the responsibility for it.
Right.
Anyway, what happened then is that I joined the Birmingham Evening Mail as first of all assistant news editor, and this was the largest regional paper in the country. Then became chief news editor. You know, at that time, Mark, we were selling 365,000 copies a night, 12 editions. I had something like, way over 50 reporters.
Mm.
So that was pretty interesting. And my best friend Ian Dowell, who was the chief sub, he later became editor there. And I'm gonna have to look at my notes because what happened then? Again, I had a bit of a difference of opinion.
There's a lot of difference of opinions going on here, Ian.
Well, because newspapers are quite volatile. I mean, these are after several years. This is not sort of 6 months at a time.
Yes.
You know, I'm 74 now. You know, I started in this business when I was 17. And the thing is about journalism and the media, you're either recognized as any good or you're no good, you know. So I think I do have a bit of a reputation in terms of trying to encourage people, helping people, particularly young people.
Mm.
And what happened then is that I actually went down to a Daily Mail paper. The Mail said, "Would you come and help us run the Western Morning News?" That's down in Plymouth. And I was assistant editor, news and marketing there. And then one day, the managing director of Northcliff, Kevin Beattie, was down there and said, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I had known him on the Mirror. I missed this out previously. I'd then gone to the Daily Mirror as marketing manager for the Mirror Group, and I was there for 4 years.
Mm.
I became pretty ill, dragged into Guy's Hospital one night, thought I was having a heart attack, and I recovered from that.
May I ask what it was?
With
what was wrong with you, Ian? If you don't mind me asking.
I had serious sort of internal problems, pancreatitis, and I was very, very ill. Mm. And I was off for about 4 months, something like that. And anyway, Kevin Beattie said, "Look, come. I want you to come and see the chairman of Northcliff." So I went to London, and they offered me. They first of all said, "We might want you to go to South Wales. Would you go to Swansea and do a bit of a recce and say what you think of the paper and the place?" So went there, came back. So gave them the report, had a phone call. They said, "Well, we don't want you to go to South Wales." What they were really saying is that, "Well, you're not Welsh and probably a bit too antagonistic towards them there." So they said, "We'd like you to go to the Citizen and edit the Citizen," right? So that was in 2002.
Right, okay.
So I came to the Citizen and, you know, really, really enjoyed it there. I then became editor-in-chief of the Echo as well. And of course, at that time, there were separate offices. The Citizen, housed in St John's Lane, which you know well, was one of the oldest newspaper offices in the country. And the Citizen itself, one of the oldest newspapers in the country. We then, of course, moved to Cheltenham,
Do you think that was do you think that was a mistake moving to Cheltenham?
I think.
When the heart had been, the paper itself had been
Well, I
always.
don't disagree with that. The problem was costs. Was it right to have two quite large buildings, and the display advertising was run from Gloucester, classified run from Cheltenham, so it made sense. Although there were a bit of some issues at first, where the MP Parvjit Danda leading a bit of a march with a wreath, to the Citizen, but that sort of blew over. But I was always conscious of that. I was always conscious that those papers were separate entities, and I was a very different sort of editor than Anita Sivray. And then what happened? Northcliff decided to combine the roles, and I was made editor-in-chief of both papers.
Sorry, do you mind, at that particular moment, did you ever think they were going to amalgamate the papers, or would it have been a good idea to amalgamate the papers then, to have the Gloucester?
There were thoughts of amalgamating the papers. I don't believe it was. I always stood out against that. They were, the people, as you know better than I do, Mark, because you come from the area, that Gloucester is very, very different from Cheltenham. And I ran the paper and still run what journalism I do on issues. I believe that issues are important. You must reflect the area. I mean, for instance, I put a lot of work, as you did, into the Urban Regeneration Company and trying to get Gloucester going again. I mean, there were times when, bluntly, developers wouldn't touch Gloucester with a barge pole. It was very, very down at the heel. And some people would say, well, it's still a bit like that. But it's come a long way, and there's a lot going on. But it's a very, very different place. Cheltenham is so-called gateway to the Cotswolds. Gloucester is a gritty place, but absolutely great people, great readers. And I got fantastic support. I'm very keen on sport. I had to learn a bit about the rules of rugby, which I still don't understand.
Yeah.
But it was a lovely, lovely job. And then what happened then? Yeah, I was asked then to go to Bristol to become content director of all the newspapers. That's Citizen, Echo, Bristol Post, Western Daily Press, all the weeklies in Somerset. So I worked from Cheltenham and from Bristol. And then I retired, quote, retired, unquote, about 4 years ago, as I was editing the Western Daily Press. And that's a great old paper which still has a very strong readership. But and then Business West approached me and said, well, would you fancy being director in Gloucestershire? It'll only take a few days a week. Didn't really work out like that. It takes a lot longer. I was always involved in the health service. I was very interested in the health service as a story. I think as a story, I've always said that health to me and everything associated with health is so, so important. Far more important than crime. Crime's easy to report. It happens. But you shouldn't become a penny dreadful, and the health service is just so important. And I was asked to be chairman of the Organ Donation Committee in Gloucestershire. I did that for about 6 years now. And I've just been asked to be regional chair of the something like 38 hospitals from here, Gloucestershire to the Isle of Wight, on organ donation. And I take a lot of pride in that, and I love working with the health service. That's where I am. I try to keep fit. I do go to the gym when they're open, and a trainer. I was always very afraid of water. I learned to swim. So, it was quite a big battle. I'm also president of Churchdown Male Voice Choir and my wife's ladies choir, the Wide Valley. I can't sing, but they want me for what I can do to promote them.
Yes.
I just love music, and we have a lot of grandchildren. We've got 9 grandchildren, and they're from Sussex to New York. So we spend a lot of time there. That's where I am, but I see, Mark, every day is a blessing. I still work in a very organised way. I'm always up very early in the morning. I read papers. I like to be informed. I'm a bit of an obsessive. I'm a work obsessive, really. If you ask people who work for me, they'd say he's a madman, but he's a sort of decent bloke. I always try and, I hope they'd say that, to encourage young people. It gives me really, really great satisfaction, Mark, to see someone like Jason Groves, the new political editor of the Daily Mail. I trained him down in Plymouth, helped him, and I love to see people getting on. And in this business, it's a pretty tough old business. And, I like to think that you're seen as someone who can give people a helping hand. But I'm also known as not an easy person to work with, because I believe people need to be told what you want. If you don't tell them and something happens, there's no point in being critical. So I'm very, very keen on ideas, and I love people who've got ideas. Love them.
Yeah. Can I just quickly go back to the time of the Gloucester Urban Regeneration Company?
Yeah.
Obviously, that was launched, I think it was, 2002, 2003, something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, about 2003.
Was the MP and all the rest of it. And you did right. Gloucester itself was, it was a bit of a mess. It had been neglected for quite some time. And the people of the city itself, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, they didn't believe in it. They didn't believe in it themselves. And one of the worst things of PR things I know is that people would always say from Gloucester would actually run their own city down. And again, they didn't really understand or wasn't communicated the history of it. I mean, when I first came here, I didn't know the history of it and what a fantastic place it actually is. You're dead right, though. The people are wonderful. And I think what happened with the Urban Regeneration Company, led by Greg Smith, led by Chris Aldershaw, and yourself as well, is that they managed to get a good group of people, the city council, the county council, everybody together to work together. That must have been difficult. How did that all happen, that bit? Can you remember?
But it was difficult. To be blunt with you, Parmjit Danda did the work here. He convinced Tony Blair that Gloucester needed help. Gloucester didn't have any money. They didn't have the money to look at the docks and this sort of development. So it was him who really did this. And I remember the first meeting, there were like, probably 15 councillors there. And the Colin Moulton, who was asked to be the sort of guy who set this up, who's a really top bloke, sort of said, look, this isn't a council committee.
Yeah.
This has got to be business people, and it's not going to be political. So in the end, Mark, as you probably know, we only had, in fact, on the board, I think there were just 2 councillors. One was Paul James and the opposition. It was difficult, but we had a great ally in Peel. And yeah, I'm a supporter of Peel, and there are many people in Gloucester who say, oh, well, yeah, you just support Peel. Yeah, I do, because they put hundreds of millions of pounds into the place. The real story here is we got in around £780 million of inward investment. Peel have so far spent, I would say, about 400 million. And Chris Aldershaw, the chief executive, was a brilliant bloke. You know, he worked in Newcastle. He knew Regeneration backwards. He knew how to handle developers. and it was very, very exciting, you know. And there were many things I heard as an editor there, and people said, well, how do you possibly square the fact that you're involved here as vice chairman and also an editor? I said, dead simple. I just support Gloucester. I don't put stuff in the paper every 2 minutes that's confidential. I never did that. It was sometimes difficult to know something and not do it or be critical. But that's what it was. And I still believe that. And I think you need to be critical, but you also need to be fair.
Yes. I mean, I always remember, obviously, the Gloucester College had to be moved, Old Brunswick Square, that had to go in order to build Gloucester College, and from Gloucester College that enable the road network, the Southwest bypass to be built, which then released the, that Peel would come in once they knew the Southwest bypass would come in. And it was that catalyst. And I always remember Chris Aldershaw saying, that it will, although the Gloucester Quays would bring in more and more inward investment. And I think it's taken a lot longer than we all thought. It was, I mean, I was on the board for, I think, 8.5 years. I think perhaps you were even there longer, sat in the marketing committees with you as well. And it has been truly amazing, and it has gone down the canal corridor, and these things take a lot of time. But oh my goodness, now with what's going to happen with retail, you've got King's Quarter, you've got these other elements. And what do you think? What do you think about it? Because do the plans need re-looking at now, Ian? Does it need to be torn up and say, okay, what's your view?
Mark, I think they do. And I read something in the Sunday Times the other day, and someone was saying, if you look at our high streets, the real issue there most of the time is just too many shops. I think if you go down some of the gate streets and you go towards the cathedral, for instance, you walk down there and you look above the shop height, fantastic places. In somewhere like Brighton in London, they'd be brilliant homes. And I think we need to look at less shops and more people living in the city centre. Now, that's not some great philosophy of mine. It's a fact that when you get people living in the centre, it starts to liven up. Gloucester is the same as when I first joined the Citizen editor. I was horrified on my first day there that the city was just so quiet from very early in the evening. Yeah. I have to say my wife is not a great lover of Gloucester in the evening, and I don't think anyone can be. And, we have to attend to that, but we've got to get people living in the centre more. I think, some of the shops will have to go, but we don't make the most of those historic gate streets. In many towns and cities, what they're looking at now, Mark, is more pedestrianisation.
All right, yeah. Which, I mean, some people would argue that obviously the pedestrianisation killed a lot of the shops in the first place. Going back when I first got here in the 80s, everything was ram-packed. The cars went through the cross. I actually marched through the cross from the prison when I was in the Air Force through there as well. Of course, that all changed. I think some of the houses being built by the docks, and all the docks being done up. Obviously, what's going over by Sainsbury's and that area over there is going to make a big difference. Down by Greyfriars, that's made a huge difference. All these elements, and I do agree with you. I think you're dead right. We need to get more people, but they're so old, those buildings. It's going to need so much investment to go through them. But I think you're right. I think something's got to be done. Can I talk to you, moving along slightly to today's modern media? Because let's be honest, yesterday the news broke out, that more jobs are going to go at Reach, which is very sad. Journalism itself is, it's being cut right across the board. How do you see this panning out? The BBC are again looking to cut regional news. It's a bit of a sad affairs. What's your view on what's going to happen?
Well, look, we've simply got to adapt with the times. Something like nearly 20 years ago, when I first joined Northcliff, I was recruited to a committee to look at online. And I used to go and see editors throughout the country talking to about digital. And these were good people. You'd be amazed. Most of them say, oh, no, that's never going to happen. It was a massive problem. Then suddenly it all changed. I'm not a techie person. I like to think I know a good story and I know good content. So it's nothing to do with being technical. So I drove that very, very hard, the digital area. And obviously that has worked, and that has now taken over from the printed word in the newspaper. But I think newspapers have been very, very slow to adapt, bluntly. I still think there is room for print products. I don't believe that, for instance, lots of people at my age want to sit at a laptop and go through loads of websites. They like papers like the Citizen, like the Western Daily Press. You know, it's a friend, they've always had it. I do think the issue really is that we have, and I know this from my grandchildren, lots of kids don't even read a paper now. They get everything from their phone, their tablet or TV. We've got to sort of meet that challenge. What's the solution? In my view, it's sort of quite simple. Have a look at what the Daily Mail does, and I'm an ex-Daily Mail man. It's a great, whether you like the politics or not, forget it. It's just a great product. They plough lots of money, lots of good people into good content. That will always win, come what may. But I'm afraid there are a lot of products that aren't good enough. I could see a situation with some of our daily papers, perhaps not being here within certainly 5 years. We look at the circulations, they're plummeting. Obviously, COVID has not done anyone any favours, hasn't it? Because for the nationals, we haven't had something like, 8,000-10,000 outlets where the papers could be bought.
Yeah.
But to me, it's all about content. It's all about good people. It is all about having the right people driving it. And, do you know, I was always told this, Mark, you only need a few good people to help you. I reckon that if I had 2 or 3 good people, I could do anything. So there's a thing about numbers of people as well. I'm not saying you just get rid of everyone. I'm saying have some really trusted people you can rely on.
And I think that's a great place to end this conversation, Ian. Thank you ever so much for joining us today and supporting Punchline as well. And hopefully we might be able to have a distant coffee very soon. That'd be great.
Yeah, Mark, that's great. And you're doing a great job. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate that. Thanks very much, Ian. Nice to see you. Bye.
Bye. Okay.